Two Girls and a Guy Named Bud is the first episode of season 8 of Two and a Half Men. This is directed by James Widdoes, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode chronologically and share some thoughts. It's an okay episode, there are definitely some good moments, and it certainly helps to move part of the main narrative forward. It starts off establishing that Alan and Lyndsey are still together. And Alan wakes up with his alarm on his watch, but Lyndsey's lying on his arm, so he can't turn it off. It's a decent enough way to start things off. I like that we're establishing that they're still together early on. Alan then goes home. He finds Charlie on the stairs with no trousers on, but his shoes on. And then they talk about Jake and how Alan doesn't want to tell Jake yet about his relationship with Lyndsey. And then we see a young woman sneaking out, presumably from Jake's bedroom. And then we see another. And then we have one of my favourite moments in the episode. Berta comes in with Charlie's trousers from the mailbox. In itself, quite funny. And then she reveals a bunch of postage stamps. That's difficult to say. Postage stamps. He'd tried to mail them, which I thought was just a really funny moment. Jake then goes through to the kitchen, cool as anything, doesn't say anything, doesn't give away anything about what may or may not have happened in his room with the two girls. And the others follow him and quiz him, and it's quite an entertaining moment. And then we have another really great moment where Jake explains that they were just staying there, they were crashing there, he slept on the floor. I don't think any of us believes this. And Alan says to him, well, why didn't you ask permission for your friends to stay over? And Jake responds, you weren't around. Where were you, by the way? Which I thought was a great moment because, yes, maybe Jake should have asked permission, but also Alan's been doing a lot of sneaking around himself. And then Charlie finds the letter in the pocket of his trousers. Apparently he'd had a bit of a mishap with the zipper, which I thought was quite a nice moment as well. Alan and Lyndsey are then back in the bedroom with some whipped cream, and Eldridge is in the house. We hear Eldridge calling through, and then we cut to Eldridge and Jake in the kitchen. The house looks really nice property. And Alan decides the best thing to do in that moment is to sneak out. And we see him dropping down onto the ground. And then Jake happens to see him. And we're then back at the house with Alan and Charlie sometime later. And Jake comes home to get his stuff, which includes food from the fridge. And he said that he saw Alan. And he was really annoyed about this. And I think Alan realised that maybe sneaking around wasn't the best idea. So very briefly, he's on the deck. Alan is on the deck with Charlie. And then they decide to go over to Judith's so that Alan can apologise to Jake. I thought this was a really good decision for him to make. And I loved the scene there. I thought it was great. Herb was really excited. Apparently everybody knows who Lyndsey is. And everybody's heard of Lyndsey Mackelroy. And apparently she'd done some soft adult entertainment. Herb's really happy for Alan. And then we have, I think, a really well-written discussion between Alan and Jake. Jake is saying all of the right things. And actually, before we get to that point, we had a really great moment where Judith said to Alan, you don't sleep with your son's friend's mother, to which Alan responds, no, you marry his paediatrician. Which I thought was pretty funny and a very good point. And then we have the discussion with Jake and Alan, and Jake is saying all of the right things, and they make a deal to both be open and honest about each other going forward. Does anybody believe they'll be open and honest? I highly doubt it, but it was a nice moment. And then we have the final scene, and all four of them, Jake, Eldridge, Lyndsey and Alan, are having dinner together. It does feel quite uncomfortable, as I imagine it would be, certainly for Jake and Eldridge. Meeting your parents' partner for the first time is always going to be uncomfortable, but when it's your best friend's mother, it's very awkward. And I don't necessarily think Alan shouldn't be with Lyndsey, but I do think they didn't go about this the right way, and they didn't consider their children's feelings at all. So I think there are some really good lessons here. And then at the very end of the episode, Charlie gets a phone call from Herb. He's sitting on the sofa while the rest of them are at the dinner table behind him. And it's from Herb. And Herb has found the soft adult entertainment featuring Lyndsey, which was, I guess, an okay enough ending. It's a decent episode. I think the important thing, for me at least, is that we have some progress with Alan and Lyndsey. And Yes, they could have dragged it out a little bit longer. They could have done some sneaking around a bit more, but I think the timing there worked very well. I think it's a solid way to start off season 8. Some great moments, particularly with Berta. Charlie was very funny. The line about Jake's pediatrician, referring to Herb, of course, I rather liked as well. So, all things considered, I'd say that 3 girls and a guy named Bud is not a bad start to season 8. Definitely an enjoyable episode. Ultimately, a pretty good episode of 2.5 Men.